Hey everyone, this is one of my most recent illustrations that I made just the other day, and I had a whole time-lapse video of it as well as a bunch of clips lying around on my hard drive, and I thought I might as well do some sort of commentary on it and try my best to explain what it was that I was doing and thinking while drawing it and painting it. If you would like to see a shorter version of it, if you're just interested in the process, I did upload a version of it where there's no rambling behind it as well. It's also just a lot shorter, so I will leave a link to it in the description. So I started off like I usually do, not really having a plan or anything. You can just see me sketching random nonsense that doesn't really have anything to do with the final image. For some reason I just really wanted to paint some bison, but the original plan was to make just a character sketch without a background. I didn't really plan on it, and that was one of the biggest mistakes that I made. Is I didn't really make any thumbnails or figure out what the composition was. You can see me kind of playing around with it right now, but I didn't really dive into it as much as I should have. So yeah, it did go out of hand a bit and out of control. So I do grab a lot of references while I draw and paint, and I smack them right on top of the canvas that I'm drawing on. So this is, for the building I knew I wanted to use some reference, so that was from the city of Prague. It's a very pretty city, I'd love to visit it one day, but I knew that I didn't want just a flat, boring building behind him, which is what I originally sketched out. So I decided to look up some reference, and that second building, I think that's also somewhere from Europe, maybe Italy, if I'm not mistaken. I know that on the picture it said that it was from Italy. So, but yes, from this image, I picked up that I really quite liked the sort of cylindrical tower that's not completely cylindrical. Well, it kind of is, but it's almost like it had its sides chopped off. So that's what I picked up from that reference and tried to include it into this piece, or in the background building behind him. So with the general illustration, this is like a fantasy medieval type of setting. So that does come with a lot of what should I call it, like quirks, I guess, in the sense that there's always some sort of grit to it, and it's not super clean as opposed to something like science fiction. And I do delve into that quite a lot when I get to rendering, and as this video progresses and as I get more and more into the details, I will try to explain what my thought process behind it was. But just shortly about the video itself, this isn't a tutorial or anything like that. I'm not claiming to know like how to teach or anything. That's an entirely different skill set, one that I don't have, and even the one that I do, like drawing and painting, I don't think it's really developed enough to the point where I could pretend to know how or what to do things, because I do make a lot of mistakes throughout this. And one very big one that I'm making right now is on the anatomy, and I will come back to that and sort of try to pinpoint what it was that I was actually doing wrong, but the video itself is mostly for me, just so I can look back and then I make these time lapses videos often, and just as of recently I did start uploading them publicly. But for me it's always very helpful to look back and see what I could have and should have done better. And another large part of this is time, and how much time I spend on pieces, whether they be just sketches or full illustrations. So this always sort of helps me look back and see how I distributed that time, how much I spent on sketching and then on painting and so on. So this right here, I know this is kind of random, but I do this quite often. I'm not somebody who can hold his attention on something for very long, and that includes with drawing, so I'll often start drawing something completely different just for the sake of it. And I ran across a picture of this little chameleon guy, and I thought he looked super cool, and I don't know, I just really wanted to draw him for some reason. He's not like he has nothing to do with the final illustration. He's not in it or anything. Well, no, he's a chameleon, so I'll say he blended in somewhere in the background. But coming back to the anatomy that I did it quite poorly, as you can see. There's quite a lot of issues with it. I usually, when I do characters, I'll pretty much always draw the body beneath it. It just helps a lot with laying the clothes on top for me. It makes it much easier to figure out how exactly the clothes are and how they are shaped. And of course a lot of that depends as well on the material and the weight of the clothes. But in general it's just, unless I'm doing a super duper quick sketch, then I will pretty much always draw the forms of, at least the forms of the body underneath, and then the clothing layer on top. But for the anatomy I really messed up there, because like if you look at the proportions of the forearm to the fist, for example, that's all messed up. His pectoral muscles, I didn't really make them as stretched out as they should be, considering that he's raising, or not completely raising his hand, but it's not entirely like it's not entirely relaxed either. But there are definitely a lot of things that I could have improved with the anatomy, which is a shame, because when I started drawing, and I still do, like, I still mostly focus on perspective and anatomy. Alright, this was another distraction that I had. I focused a lot on anatomy and perspective, and the way I would draw these characters is I would often start from the ground up, meaning that I would first sketch in loosely the pose that I was going to make the character have, and then on top of that I would draw the skeleton, and then on top of that the musculature system, and then finally the skin layer and fatty tissues, if there are. I mean, obviously there are, but depending on the like fat percentage of the character, of the body, it's different. And then I draw the clothes and design and all of that good stuff. But I was definitely out of shape while drawing this when it comes to anatomy. And it's definitely annoying, but it's just, it's fun to come back to always. And I was thinking of doing that sort of method where I'll draw the skeletal and then the musculature system first, and then the skin and everything else, but in the end I decided against it, because honestly I was just very unsure about it and wasn't very confident in it, especially from that angle. He's very slanted like towards the camera a little bit, and I knew that would be a nightmare for the pelvis. That's like one of the hardest things for me to draw, is the pelvis. As you can see, it's like we're essentially staring at the bottom of his pelvis right now. And the pelvis in itself isn't that hard to draw. Like if I were to simplify it, it's essentially just a bucket, or like a outwards tapered cylinder. But if I'm going to draw something like the skeleton, then I try to be as thorough as I can. I obviously won't draw like all of the carpals or anything abysmal like that, but I do like to, like, if we're talking about the pelvis right now, I do like to make it look believable, at least somewhat. Obviously, I'm not capable of realistic stuff completely, but it's just something that I'll have to improve on some more, and hopefully I'll be able to do it better, because as of right now I still cannot draw a pelvis completely without reference. So yeah, hopefully I'll able to do it one day without having to use it. So right now I am, this is the final sketch pass that I'm doing before I get on to painting and values and stuff. And up until this point, I'd say it was going pretty smoothly, aside from the anatomy that I just mentioned. It was, yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. I'm much more comfortable with drawing and inking and sketching than I am with painting and values. Values always confuse me, and especially the relationship between values, hue, and saturation. It's very hard for me to juggle those, and you'll see me struggling a lot with this one, because there's essentially two light sources behind him, and then it was quite a nightmare to figure it out, but it was very fun, and I will go into more details when that actually comes into play. But for the building itself, this is, like I said, a that's a little Patrick Star. This is like a fantasy medieval type of setting. So the idea behind it is as well, like, that comes into play with the character's backstory. The idea was that he was maybe robbing some sort of high district, I don't know, like first class type of thing. I'm imagining the like social structure in this city and in this universe or whatever is almost like feudalism, where the rich and the poor are very like nobility is very separated from commoners or peasants, which I guess would kind of be the same today, although it's not. Anyway, yeah. So I decided to make the building look very fancy, as if somebody of high financial status, or just high social status, I should say, is living in there. So there are these like little engravings in the tower, and I do flesh it out a bit more when I actually get to rendering it. But for the character himself and the design, when designing characters, I have, well, I guess I can say it, like, I do try to sort of draw it by some sort of principle. It's not as fancy as it sounds, or as I make it out to be. It's essentially, I always like to make it look like, if you really zoomed in the character and picked out all of the details and little, just based on the equipment they're wearing or the clothes they wear, and if it's a like character concept or illustration, just if it's not a scene like this one, and if I'm drawing characters just based off of the body language and stuff like that, I always like, it's almost like those Sherlock Holmes scenes, if you've ever seen or read any Sherlock Holmes stuff, where he will like scan a person up and down and analyze them, and like, I don't know, if you had mustard for breakfast, I can tell because there's a mustard stain on your pants, something like that. I try to make these characters look somewhat believable, Not necessarily realistic, obviously, like, but for him specifically, like for the clothing in general, he doesn't wear any magical items. He's not super fancy. There's not any. He's not wearing any fancy clothes or anything. And the idea was that if you saw this guy just walking down the street, you wouldn't really pay any attention to him. He wouldn't really jump out as being unordinary, unless obviously he's carrying a bunch of weapons and tools and a grappling hook like he is here, but that's besides the point. That's this is like a heist mission or something, so it makes sense in the context, I hope at least. So the character himself, he is Bungo Bottomfell, a halfling rogue. It's a D&D character, and I will get into his backstory, or like just very loosely. I'm not gonna read all of it, but just like so it's a bit more clear about all of the design elements and details that I try to incorporate. But the short gist of it is he comes from a potato farming family. Actually, I'll just say the backstory now, it's not that long anyway. He comes from a backstory, or from a potato farming family, but he's not very happy with it. He has a bunch of siblings, and he's like the middle child, and so he always wanted to be more and to not just be seen as that potato kid from that Bottomfell family. And regarding his name, I'll be honest, I completely ripped it off from The Hobbit. I think it's in the first couple of pages. His, like, Bilbo's dad is called Bungo, so I always liked that name, and I used it for this character. Yeah, this is where I start getting into painting, so I did a couple of sketches, quick sketches about like what sort of lighting I was going for. And then his last name, Bottomfell, honestly it was sort of the idea where I got that he's falling from something or from somewhere. It just kind of draws itself, Bottomfell, and he's jumping out of a window, so yeah, I'm quite a sucker for puns. But yes, so coming back to his backstory really quickly, he wasn't happy with farming potatoes, so he figured out that he had a knack for stealing things and for breaking in, so he became like an information broker. So essentially, if you wanted some documents stolen or forged, this would be the guy to contact. He's essentially like giving out false IDs, I guess. He's one of those characters where on paper, if you read about him, he sounds super cool, but he's actually quite stupid and clumsy. Maybe not stupid, but definitely clumsy. Like, you'd think he's some sort of Batman character, but he's definitely not. He's definitely not anything like that. So this is where I started having a lot of issues, like I said. Drawing the thing wasn't all that difficult, but when I start putting in the lighting, that's where I had a lot of issues. Specifically about the building, as well as the probably most difficult thing was rendering the character and applying the lighting on him, and I had quite a lot of issues with values, because like I said, there's just two different light sources behind, so it was quite tricky to get down. But you might have noticed from the beginning of the video when I showed the full painting, it does look quite different. For starters, the giant moon isn't there in the background. So the idea behind that was, I'm a big sucker for those very comic booky large moons, and I wanted to incorporate something like that, but in the end it didn't work out because he has 2 light sources behind him, and if I were to paint that realistically, his entire front would have to be completely dark, and since it is a character focused piece, I didn't want that really, and I definitely wanted the character and especially his face to be the focal point. So I do quite a big of a repaint or overpaint later. I do that off camera because the video is pretty long as it is, but I got some very, very good feedback and a critique from a good friend of mine, Steve Sketches. I will leave a link to his stuff in the description, although I'm pretty sure that anybody who's watching this knows who Steve is. It's probably just a couple of close friends who are going to watch this anyway, but in case there is somebody new that doesn't know who Steve is, he's a great artist, very skilled, and a good friend. So he gave me some pointers about it, and I will talk about the changes at the end when the video finishes. So for the building, I did mention that I had a couple of issues rendering it. Most notably, it was, I think, I knew I wanted to make the building look yellow, or not look yellow, but have a yellow facade. And one of those very bright, saturated yellow types of walls or colors. Almost like if you saw it in the middle of a day, like in the afternoon, in a sunny day, it would look like almost the house was glowing. Not literally, obviously, not like it's, actually glowing. I mean, not figuratively either. I'm not saying the building's hot, but I had a lot of issues making it look yellow under blue light. And you can see, like, that one plane of the building right now is actually quite yellow, but the one facing the character, the one where the window is that he's jumping from, it is quite darker now. And I mean, that makes sense because of the moon, but it's also way more blue than the other one. The other one also later becomes much more blue, but so that's from the lighting itself, from the moon, or from the light reflecting from the moon. But the way I sort of got around that to make the building still look somewhat yellow is I made the blue very, very desaturated. So in the end, it's still okay. Yeah, you can see me fixing it a little bit and trying to make it look more yellow there. But yeah, I essentially desaturated the blue so it looks a bit more warm. I'm not very good at color theory, and it took me a while to figure it out, but luckily there were some very good and helpful videos on YouTube about it. So for the building itself, I always try, if I'm doing bigger pieces with the background or an environment or something, I try to make it look like the environment the characters are in have also like as much character as the characters themselves, if that makes sense. So with the building, I made like the facade was peeling off and chipping off, and later I add like a little bird's nest under the windowsill, as well as some cobweb around the corners. And you can see me now painting like the brick work behind it, or behind the facade, I mean. So while somebody of nobility and high status lives here, I doubt that the building gets like renovated every day. So it's just it's nice to make these sorts of stuff look like they were actually built and like they actually exist. So this was around the time now that there's going to be quite a drastic switch in the video. Specifically, I switched to recording on OBS, and so far I've been using the built-in time-lapse feature of Clip Studio, but I ran into a lot of hardware difficulties where it just slowed everything down because I was recording it with Clip Studio, and it made things quite a nightmare. I don't have the best PC, like not the worst either, definitely, but it got to the point where it took me like 5 minutes to save, and I'm not even exaggerating. I'd actually go to the bathroom and come back and it would still be saving, so I decided to download OBS and set it up and record with that instead, so that Clip Studio wasn't as buggy, and I think that change is about to happen soon-ish. So with the character, you can see I did spend quite a lot of time on rendering his face, just because he had quite a unique facial expression that was sort of hard to figure out, especially rendering it. But for his face, he is a halfling, so I wanted, it just in my head, halflings they always look younger than they actually are, and they're always like chubbier. So I wanted to give him sort of one of those faces where you're not entirely sure if he is 40 years old or 14. I'm not sure if I succeeded entirely in that. I think I made him look actually quite a lot younger. Just because of the roundness of his face, as well as I added like a chipped tooth to make him even younger and a bunch of freckles. But yeah, for his general appearance, for some reason I always imagined this character looking like having features almost like from Southern Europe, like from Spain or Italy. So with that I mean like darker skin and darker hair and eyes and like curly hair. I don't know why that's engraved in my head for this character, but I always, for some reason, imagined him to be so. So I tried to incorporate that as well into his final design. So yeah, I also, it's very hard to spot from this distance, but I think the switch will be right about now to OBS, so it will be much more noticeable what it is that I'm actually rendering. So it's actually a good thing that I switched to that recording type, because yeah, it's from this distance it's quite hard to see what it is that I'm working on, since it's quite zoomed out, but I think soon it will fix itself. Okay, so yeah, this is about the time where I set up OBS and downloaded and all of that good stuff and started recording it that way. So now it's much more visible what it is that I'm actually doing. So I'll try to explain some of the design elements now of the character. So this cloak, I really wanted it to be like a very like bundled up, almost oversized cloak that he has, and that was quite hard to pull off, especially like the bundled up around his shoulders thing. And and I sort of also had to think about how the cloak would move and sway around with him jumping out of the window, and it would be pushing back. And yeah, it was quite a process to figure it out, and I'm still not happy 100% with it, with the final result. But I think the problem with the cloak, and you can see me spending quite a lot of time on rendering it, but I think the problem is that I started off way too soon on rendering the small bits and the small occlusion shadows without actually figuring out the bigger shapes. That's something I always have to keep in mind. I have a bad habit of zooming in way too much and delving into the details of some parts of the drawing and then leaving them out in others. And it's not very good to do that, because it eventually just makes things much more of a hassle and a longer process to do. So for his outfit, he is wearing this like blue tunic. I didn't originally plan to make it blue, but I don't know, somehow when I was plopping down the local colors, I for some reason made it blue. I'm not sure how good of a idea that was, because he's not living in poverty, but he's not awfully rich either, and considering that blue was like quite a hard color to get, I don't quite know where he got it from, but you know, it also kind of makes sense that he would wear something dark and something that would blend in with the night. That does kind of counteract the point of him wearing that cloak, because it is like brown, and especially later I add a flannel or a plaid, what's it called, not texture, pattern on it. There we go, I'm doing it right now, although I come back to it later. I just thought it would be much more interesting than just a boring old brown cloak. And I have to admit, I was also quite biased. Like, if anybody knows me, they'll tell you that I have a bunch of flannel shirts, button-up shirts, and stuff like that, and hoodies. But yeah, you can see me trying to fix the mistakes that I made with the cloak and render out some of the bigger shapes. I paint over it quite a lot, as well as way later in the painting I wasn't very happy with the general flow and the shape of the cloak, so I completely move it and paint over the whole thing. So under his like blue tunic or jacket, I don't know what. Yeah, no, it's more like a tunic, I guess. He's not wearing any armor or anything, but under that blue shirt, I did add him like a very worn out gambeson type of armor. And if you don't know what that is, it's essentially just layered up clothing, or a stuffed, or a piece of clothing that's like stuffed with certain material, like wool maybe, or something. It's kind of like a protective armor type of thing. And I knew that it would probably be something that he couldn't afford to get on his own, so I made it very, very worn down and like almost shredded and torn out at bits, and there's a lot of material, like the inner material poking out. I thought it would be a good idea to make it look like he maybe just found it like maybe thrown out somewhere near the soldiers' barracks, or like the guardsmen barracks, or something like that. Just very secondhand something. He's definitely the type of character that picks up and wears and uses whatever he can get, and it's not like he has everything tailored to him specifically. I do get to rendering the gambeson a bit later. I mean, it's not that big of a deal anyway. It's not very visible either. Like just under, yeah, there we go. Under the blue tunic next to the arm, as well as from underneath, like near the crotch area, it's visible a little bit as well. So this is still me kind of struggling with the lighting and everything, and I wasn't very happy with. Even now, I realized my mistake of not planning out the lighting very well for him, and how it would fall on him, because he does have two light sources behind him, one being from the inside of the building, like some torchlight, and the other being the giant moon. But as I said, I do I get rid of the moon later because it just didn't really make sense for the lighting scenario that I painted him in. But for the inside of the building, there is a very warm and very bright, like firelight or candlelight, and the idea behind that was, like, he was robbing something and maybe got caught, and I'm not exactly sure how the lights inside would have lit up immediately. Maybe it was some mage that just like snapped his fingers or something and then lit up all of the torches or the candles inside. But I knew that I wanted to. And this wasn't something I planned either. It was kind of just as I went along. I thought it would be nice if there was a contrasting light with the blue moonlight. So if there was like a warm and a colder side. One side was colder light and the other warmer light. I thought that might be quite nice to incorporate. But I get to that way later. So for his like general equipment and gear that he uses, you can see he has, well, maybe it's not noticeable right now because I didn't render it, but he has essentially like a bag, like one of those over-the-shoulder bags, or pouches, I guess, I don't know. I always like to, when I'm designing characters, I always love to make it look like they're actually adventurers. Well, if they are, but if I'm getting D&D commissions, most often than not, they are like adventurers. So I do like to like equip them with a bunch of pouches and bandoliers and bags, satchels, all of that good stuff, because I'm not the biggest fan of characters that don't have anything, like any sort of carrying capacity. So that's something I always try to keep an eye out when I'm drawing these. So for him specifically, he does have one bag over his shoulder. It's attached to a rope and some sort of leather stripe, or like leather thong type of thing, strap. And the idea behind that was it was just something that he could make up himself or just quickly craft himself. So the bag, it has like one of those usual bag pouches. It has on the sides two little clips that you can like clip to, but in this case he tied a knot around it and then tied the other end of the rope to this leather strap that he has. So that's like it's very improvised. It's not, like I said, the idea behind it was that it's something that he could figure out, or not figure out. It's not like he made a discovery, but it was something that he would easily make himself for himself. And then for the other one, it's not noticeable that it's a bag, but that strap across his shoulder, or across, not shoulder, but across his breasts, or, well, chest, not breasts, under the cloak. The idea for that one was almost like a knapsack type of thing. Not necessarily a typical backpack, something like we use nowadays, but I wanted it to make it work like it. So on his back he has some sort of bag or satchel or something, and so if he tugged or pulled that leather strap, the bag would essentially flip 180 degrees and come to his front, and so he could like pick whatever it was that he needed from the bag, and then if he pulls on the leather strap again, it rotates back. So that's something that I probably, if I wanted to properly visualize it and show it off instead of explaining what it is, I definitely need to make like a concept sheet for him and break down all of the gear and equipment he uses. But maybe I'll do that one day, I don't know. So really quickly about his, I did talk about his facial features and like his general appearance, but quickly about his build. I probably should have done this when I was talking about the anatomy, but in any case, I did, like I said, in my head, halflings always have, like, they're always a bit chubbier and a bit fuller, but he is a farmer, so he does have, I imagine, quite a lot of upper strength. I think farmers get underrated in that regard. They're quite tough, I'd imagine, like pulling stuff out and lifting heavy things and working with a bunch of heavy tools. That would definitely make you yoked. But for him, I didn't necessarily make him like super built or shredded, but like he does have a chubbier body, but I did want to make it believable to the point, like if he's going to be running around rooftops and jumping and climbing stuff, he definitely like at least need to do pull-ups every day a couple of times. So I did give him like slightly bigger arms. They're not super defined or anything. It's not like his biceps or triceps or brachialis are bulging out, but I did try to account for that and keep that in mind, that he is nimble and he is climbing and pulling himself up on ledges and stuff like that. So body types are quite important, I feel like, when designing characters, and especially like if we're talking bodybuilder type of bodies, those are actually quite hard to get, and I'm not sure how possible it would be in this type of setting to get it, because it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to have a low body fat percentage to have a lot of upper arm strength, or even like, or not upper arm, I mean upper body, or even lower body strength. But like bodybuilder bodies are quite hard to maintain and to develop, so Uh, I rarely like use that. Like there are definitely a couple of instances where I will draw a character with that body shape in mind. But yeah, it's not so bad if it looks like the character isn't completely shredded and uh, built. So I did talk a little bit about his cloak, and how I thought about making it super dark, but in the end I didn't. The I did make it very like warm colored. I did try to think about that as well, and the reason for him to have that sort of cloak was, like in the night time, it's not like roofs are illuminated. It's not like there are any street lamps on top of rooftops. That wouldn't make sense. So I feel like it doesn't really matter much what sort of clothing you're wearing, unless it's like super neon green or pink or purple or something like that. Um, you're probably not going to be visible if you're running around in the middle of the dark on top of dark rooftops. But in the middle of the day, I can imagine these rooftops being like brick red or like made from brick material or brick-like material. So that's why I gave him a brownish reddish cloak if he has to run around in the middle of the day across rooftops. He might be less noticeable if his cloak was of the similar hue and color of the roofs he's running on. So now this is what I was talking about earlier, and about the blue color and how hard it is to get. I thought maybe it would be a good idea if I changed the color, but in the end I decided against it. It's not that big of a deal anyway. And it's not like I'm going for super duper realism. I mean, I'm drawing a guy jumping, like a halfling jumping from a building. I'm pretty sure if this were realistic, he'd go splat. But luckily, he does have his trusty grappling hook with him. So for the story of this painting, I didn't, probably sounding like a broken record by now, but I didn't really plan it, and I sort of thought about it as I went along. I don't like ever write stuff down. I'm not a writer. I'm not very good at writing, and but I can totally see this being his first night out with a grappling hook. Like maybe he got it commissioned by a blacksmith, from a black market blacksmith, and he's still very inexperienced in using it. So that's why I definitely had a lot of fun painting his facial expression, and that might have been like a reason for it. He's not very sure if he will, like, will the grappling hook attach or not. It's anybody's guess now, so he's quite spooked if he'll go splat or not. Like maybe he got, maybe this was his first big, like first time that he was hired by a bigger client, like some big merchant or something like that, and had to break into the super secured and super guarded tall tower, so that's why he needed to get a grappling hook for it. So now that I started slowly rendering the pants, I should say, um, I did try to incorporate some story elements in there as well. Specifically, I did say how he's like the middle child and had a bunch of siblings. So with like older siblings, I imagine there's a lot of second hand or even third or fourth hand clothing. So it's not like brand new and it's been worn um, for some time. So when I actually start adding in the details, I add a bunch of patches and stitch work to it to look as if it's been mended over the years and like it's not brand new. Another little, very tiny hint that I made for his siblings is he has a scar on his face. Not now, I added way later, like on the bridge of his nose. It's not a super duper gnarly scar or a very epic looking one. It's essentially the idea behind it was that maybe like while playing with his siblings or chasing or something, he maybe fell somewhere on something and like hit his head or like the corner of his eyes or like the bridge of his nose against like a table or something like that. So that's why I did add that scar later, but that's way later in the painting. So now I'm adding the patches that I was talking about. They definitely add a lot of character to the pants. And in general, when with clothing, what I try to do is make it look like they've actually been handcrafted and made. So a good way to show that is with just a lot of stitch work, a lot of seams here and there, and a good way to sort of get informed on that, I feel like, is watching a lot of videos of how stuff is made, even something like from the actual show, like how it's made. There's always something super interesting to see. So yeah, here I made a little tear on his pants, and just a lot of covered up stitching and mending and stuff like that. I also did add a little pouch on his leg, like a thigh pouch or whatever it's called. For that one, I can see him using it as like his quick access tools, maybe like lockpicks or something. If he quickly needs to lockpick a chest or maybe in this case maybe he had to lockpick the window so he could get out. So his tools are always at the ready at his side, so he doesn't need to lose a lot of time like searching for them in his pouch, like the bag across his shoulders or the backpack one. So it's just something of ease of access is why I added that pouch as well, or that that pouch on his legs. So yeah, there you can see me adding those ripped gambeson details that I was talking about. And with his feet, I think my most hated thing to draw is the feet and to paint as well, and I think in this painting it's quite obvious as well. But I did try to make it a little bit interesting. So he is a halfling, like I said, and in my head they're always sort of very Tolkienian based. So they don't wear any shoes, at least I don't imagine them to. If I'm doing a commission and if the client says that they're wearing something, then I'll probably incorporate it. But for this one, I tried to. It's a very small detail, and I just did it. I'm rendering it right now, but I tried to visually make the soles of the feet, like the fat pads, like the heels and the toes and like under the toes, and I tried to make it look actually thicker than for our normal feet. And the way I did that, I looked up at some bear foot or bear paw reference, and if you look at the paws and like the pads there, they're very coarse and very textured. So that's what I tried to emulate with his foot, the one that's looking towards the camera. I thought it might be a sort of fun, neat idea to make it look like it was actually thick and not like a normal foot that if he stepped on something that it would completely penetrate it or something like that. So yeah, it's always fun to add those little details, even though I doubt anybody will notice them anyway. But I mostly do these for myself anyway. For his armbands right now, I originally added them just because they looked cool, and there's definitely nothing wrong with that, but for me, I do want characters to have a reason to wear what they're wearing. And I originally added them for basically for like the rule of cool. And for drawing purposes as well, it helps to accentuate the form of the forearm. It's essentially cylindrical, so it wraps around quite nicely, but I wanted a bit more than that. So I figured, and this was actually inspired by a show that I'm watching called Brooklyn Nine-Nine. A good friend of mine recommended this to me. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's an episode where the good guys are trying to catch a bad guy, and the only way they can find him is he has a very distinct scar across his palm, across the inside of his hand. And I thought it would be, and like they eventually, that's how he gets busted. They recognize his scar. And I thought for the armbands around Bungo here, I thought it would be fun if maybe he had a giant birthmark on one of his forearms, something very easily distinguishable and very easy to notice. So he'd want to wrap that so that in case he gets busted like he did now, or almost caught, he's not as easily findable or searchable if anybody wants to take action against the thief. So I did make it. If you look right now, there is a hint of that birthmark with under the wrappings. In the end, it's not that noticeable because they do add a big cast shadow across his arm, like from his forearm. But yeah, it was just a nice little detail and a good reason to have him wear those wraps. Of course, he could just wear long-sleeved stuff, but where would the fun there be? And he's not gonna wear any armor, like any protective braces or anything, so those wraps seem like a good alternative. And for fantasy type of characters, it's always a bit weird if the like wrist area or forearm area is like naked or there's nothing there. I don't know, I feel like in fantasy stuff that there's always something going around the arm area, as well as like the hip, like the hip area, there's always something dangling from there, or pouches or belts or whatnot. And I feel like the big birthmark on his forearm would actually be quite detrimental if he had it uncovered. I think I've read somewhere that the human brain is very sensitive to these big unusual features that some people have, like big scars or something like that. So yeah, that was just a bonus reason to have him carry or wear those wrappings. Over here, I think I went to the bathroom and didn't press pause, or I think I did. I thought I pressed pause on the recording, but actually didn't. So that was my bad. But since it did pause for a little bit, I should say, previously I mentioned how I try to incorporate body language, or like the pose, as a sort of way to um, figure out the character design and to make it a bit more obvious who the character is, what they do. And that's obviously not just the pose, like the whole outfit and the whole uh, equipment they carry, that all sort of plays a role in explaining who the character is and what they do and who they are and what they're like, their personality. But for this type of illustration, it's obviously quite hard to incorporate body language since he is flying off of a window, so there's not much room for making any like any big noticeable poses, or like body shape or body language poses types of things, you know what I mean. But I still tried to make it a little bit apparent. He's like flying off of the window very haphazardly and very chaotically, and he's kind of a person like that anyway. He's a bit of a like rebellious type of guy, and not very experienced in this, so it's not like he's gracefully dropping down from the window. So that's why I tried to I did try to make it look very like all over the place and very jumpy, I guess. And stuff like that can be a very powerful storytelling tool in these sorts of things. Like, even if you go outside and just observe people, I think you can pick up quite a lot based on their body language and what they're wearing and how they're carrying themselves and how they talk, and all of that stuff can really tell a lot about a person. Maybe I'll do like, if I get a commission for a character or something, maybe I'll record that as well. I don't know, maybe we'll see, and then try to explain that sort of stuff more, of how I try to do it. I do later on revisit his hands as well, just a little bit. It's not very noticeable what I do, but I added a couple of bruises and like a little bit of a chipped nail, because hands aside from the face, hands tell a lot about a person, especially in these sorts of times where there was a lot of manual work or manual labor involved. So with him being a potato farmer by day and a thief at night, it's definitely like, I don't think he would have squeaky clean hands. So I do revisit that later. For this quiver, so he's not. First, I should say he's not like a hired killer. He doesn't kill people. But I still wanted to have him have a bow and arrows. So obviously the question was, like, why would he need a bow and arrow if he doesn't kill people? So I thought it would be cool, and this was something that I got inspired by from the Thief game series, if you've ever played them. I haven't played them, but I did see a couple of videos on YouTube, and essentially what he has is it's like a bunch of gadget arrows, like some he uses to like some have, I imagine like a damp cloth around them, like at the tip. So he uses them to turn off lights on, like candlelight from a distance, or maybe some are fire arrows, so he could actually turn on lights or something like that. So that's what I wanted to incorporate with that, and the way I did that, like the next question was, how would he be able to differentiate between those without seeing the tip of the arrow, like the arrowheads? And so what I did was, like right now, I added that little, like they're color coded. They're like different colored strings that he could look at and then see, like, okay, so the blue color, let's say, is the water arrow, or like the dampening arrow, and then the red one is a fire arrow or something that he could, it's obviously not magically fired, like he'd have to ignite it himself, but so that's what I tried to do there. But then I also thought, like, if he was in a pressured situation where he would have to act very quickly, he obviously couldn't like take a moment to look at the arrows and the little strings attached at the shafts of the arrow. So I tried to make the feathers almost different types of textures. I don't think I managed to do that quite successfully, like from a visual standpoint. I don't think the textures look very different from one another, but that was the idea behind it, at least. And for the quiver, I didn't want to give him any like military quiver or like anything super fancy. So it's just a bunch of hides and leather strapped around, and like the leather specifically, if you look at it, it's supposed to be deer leather. It's very spotted and it has this like pattern over it that deer have. It's quite unique and very different from other types of leatherwork. So I can totally see him getting that from some sort of local hunter or hide or like tanner or something like that. Another thing that was bothering me quite a lot while painting it, his hand was making quite a big tangent with the windowsill, and I do fix that later on. That was an input by Steve that he gave me. It was quite annoying. Like the first idea that I had behind it was that he was like his hand was leaning against the windowsill and then he jumped over it, but it also wouldn't have made sense if, like, how would he be able to throw the grappling hook at the same time? So in the end, final product, I do move him up so his hand isn't that close to the window edge, so there isn't that gross tangent over there, kind of breaking the whole thing. Now is also the time where I add a bunch of these final details, like the bird's nest and the cobwebs around. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the building itself. So like I said, it's like some sort of nobleman or very high social status guy, woman, whatever, lives there. but that doesn't mean that the building gets renovated like every day, every month, or every year. Um, so I did want to add a whole lot of character to the building, and like I'm pretty sure I had the most fun painting the building and drawing it as well, like designing it and everything. But I'm pretty sure if you went to like um, even like some high-end modern cities like New York, although maybe not New York. New York has a lot of 20th century buildings, but I mean it's still quite modern, I would say. It has like or even Dubai, I would say like that's more modern. Like I've never been to any of these cities, but I can totally see that. I'll bet if you looked around even some of the squeakiest cleans of buildings that there are going to be a lot of wear and tear on them. Like maybe not if they're super duper brand new, but just from natural exposure and from the elements and whatnot, there are always going to be a couple of spots and scratches and whatnot on them. So that was sort of the idea behind the chipped facade and the brickwork showing from the inside of the building, like the foundation of it. Um, yeah, I quite enjoy architecture and love looking at it and drawing it as well. So it was nice being able to incorporate it into this piece, even if it was very unplanned. Adding a couple of final touches before the recording ends. I did get way too overboard with the layer modes. Um, I shouldn't have done it as much as I did. Oh yeah, this is adding some freckles to his face to make him look even younger. Um, but oh, now comes the grappling hook. I had a lot of fun adding the grappling hooks are super awesome. I wish I could draw them in every drawing I do. But like I said, the lighting was definitely the biggest issue for me and the biggest problem while finishing this piece. It just he looked completely like he didn't belong in the painting, like in the background. It almost looked like I snipped him out of some other drawing and then plastered him on top of the uh, building. So I tried to fix that with the final version, and I will talk about it in just a bit when this video time-lapse ends. So I wasn't very happy with the skyline in the background either. I was very lazy with it, and even in the very, very final image, there's quite a lot of laziness to it, and that's quite noticeable if you look at it. I can totally see myself revisiting this piece later and repainting it and hopefully making it better. But now come the very final couple of details, and then I will explain what it was that I changed in the final product. Okay, so this is the final image. And as you can see, it looks quite different than from what it looked like just a moment ago. So I got some very great input from Steve. I'm very grateful for that. So he suggested that I moved the moon completely out of the canvas, so it looked like it was off to a side. So I tried to do that, and the way I did it, like I imagined the moon to be like almost perpendicular to his left side. That way there's that cast shadow from the forearm, and there would be quite a harsh shadow on his right side of the face. So that's what I did. I also made the shadow on the building in some parts just a little bit darker. I also moved him up a little bit, so there wasn't that tangent that I was mentioning. And obviously I added a big building, another tower behind. So yeah, that was just to make it a little bit more believable, like he was in this super fancy and rich district. So to compensate for the giant moon missing, because I was quite sad to paint over it and to make it go, because yeah, like I said, I do love those big moons. I did add just for fun, and it also kind of plays into his backstory. What happens later? There is a shadowy figure, like perched on top of the corner of the building, right there, like looking over him. I can see how it could be mistaken for a flag or something from this distance, but it was fun to paint nonetheless. I also made the sky super cloudy. I thought it would fit in a bit better. And besides, there are always more paintings for me to paint giant moons on top of, whether they be environmental pieces or character pieces like this one, like character-centered pieces, I mean. So what I learned from this definitely is that I maybe sometimes zoom in too much. This was the first time that I was watching a process video of a painting that I did, where it wasn't from the time-lapse feature of Clip Studio. So I actually got to see how much I was zooming in and how much I was flipping around the canvas. I get super paranoid about that. But yes, so that was this is the final image. That was the process behind it. If you actually watched all this time, thank you. If you haven't and you just came back to see the final result, thank you anyway. So yes, besides that, I hope, if anything, this video was at least entertaining and best case scenario educational. But besides that, I hope you enjoyed and I hope you have a good day.